Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. You gave your time, your love, your energy, everything. You tolerated disrespect, endured the absence of appreciation, and waited far too long for change that never came. You spoke, cried, pleaded, and explained, hoping he would see your worth. But he didn't. Or worse, he did and chose to ignore it. Silence is often misunderstood. People frequently associate it with weakness, submission, or emotional distance. But in truth, silence can be one of the strongest, most powerful forms of expression. It's a quiet act of self-control, a refusal to react out of emotion, and a deliberate choice to rise above chaos. In a world that constantly demands us to speak, explain, defend, or argue, choosing silence becomes an act of boldness. It is strength dressed in calm. When someone hurts you, betrays you, or dismisses your worth, the natural instinct is to speak out, to make them see your pain, to make them understand what they've done. You want to argue, to demand answers, to pour out everything you feel in hopes that it might change something. But sometimes words fall on deaf ears. Sometimes, no matter how much you explain, the person who hurt you isn't ready to hear you. And that's when silence becomes your greatest power. Silence means you are no longer seeking validation from someone who didn't affect you when they had you any. You are no longer chasing understanding from someone who refused to see things from your perspective. In choosing silence, you communicate something that words never could. You've moved on from needing their approval, their apology, or their excuses. You are no longer giving them the satisfaction of knowing they still affect you. And that quiet detachment can hit harder than any shouted confrontation. This kind of silence doesn't come from giving up. It comes from growth. It's the result of learning that peace is more valuable than being right, that dignity is worth more than temporary satisfaction, and that some people don't deserve access to your voice anymore. You realize that you don't have to explain your worth to someone who failed to recognize it. Your absence, your stillness, your decision to walk away without drama, that speaks louder than any message you could ever send. There is incredible strength in choosing not to react. You learn to sit with your pain instead of lashing out. You teach yourself to be still when every part of you wants to scream. And in that stillness, something beautiful happens. You begin to heal. You start to hear your own voice again, clearer and more honest than ever before. Silence becomes the space where you find yourself again, where you begin to rebuild your sense of self, not shaped by others' opinions, but by your own truth. For the person who hurt you, your silence can be haunting. They expect anger, they expect begging, they expect drama. What they don't expect is nothing. No calls, no messages, no confrontation, just a sudden absence where you used to be. And that absence speaks volumes. It forces them to sit with the consequences of their actions without distraction. It makes them realize that they no longer have the emotional power they once held over you. And that realization stings more deeply than any argument ever could. So while the world may see silence as passive, those who have mastered it know better. They know it's not about ignoring the pain, it's about honoring it in a way that protects your peace. It's about showing yourself the respect you were denied by others. And most of all, it's about knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is absolutely nothing at all. You've already given enough, more than enough. You've given your time, your energy, your heart, and your patience. You've poured yourself into someone who kept taking without ever truly giving back. You stayed when you should have walked away. You forgave when you should have let go. You believed in their potential, their promises, their apologies, even when all the evidence told you otherwise. And still you gave more. You gave until it hurt. You gave until there was barely anything left of you to hold on to. There comes a moment when your spirit feels tired, not just physically or emotionally drained, but tired deep within your soul. That kind of exhaustion doesn't come from laziness or indifference. It comes from caring too much for too long without ever receiving the same in return. You were the one always trying, always fixing, always understanding. And while there's beauty in loving with that kind of intensity, there's also danger in losing yourself in the process. You kept hoping that your loyalty would inspire change, that your love would be enough to wake them up. But some people are never ready to receive what they don't understand. They mistake consistency for weakness, kindness for desperation, and love for something they can manipulate. You didn't fail by giving. In fact, your ability to love that deeply speaks to your strength. But the truth is, love should never be one-sided. It should never feel like you're carrying the weight of the entire relationship on your own shoulders. It should never demand that you constantly sacrifice your own happiness just to maintain peace. You're not responsible for teaching someone how to treat you with respect. That lesson should have been learned long before they came into your life. And if they couldn't value your presence while they had it, it's not your job to keep trying to make them see it. You've already given enough, and it's okay to stop. It's okay to stop explaining, stop fixing, stop hoping. It's okay to walk away, not because you're angry or bitter, but because you finally realize your worth. You deserve a love that doesn't drain you. A connection that doesn't ask you to constantly prove your value. You deserve to be met with the same level of energy, care, and respect that you so willingly gave. Sometimes people only understand what they had after it's gone. Sometimes the silence you leave behind is the only thing loud enough to get their attention. But by the time they realize it might be too late and that's not your burden to carry anymore, You're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not cold for deciding to protect your peace. You're not heartless for walking away from someone who made you feel like you were never enough, even when you gave them everything. There's power in drawing the line. There's freedom in finally saying, I've done all I can. And there's healing in choosing to no longer beg for the bare minimum. You don't owe anyone more of yourself when they never knew what to do with what you already gave. You've done your part. You stayed longer than you should have, loved harder than you were loved in return, and gave chances that weren't deserved. Now it's time to give to yourself, time to redirect that energy, that love, that effort inward. Let them sit with the absence of everything you used to give so freely. Let them feel what it's like to no longer have access to someone who would have done anything for them. You've already given enough, and now it's time for you to receive. He took your presence for granted. He got used to you always being there, answering the phone, replying to every message, showing up even when he didn't deserve your time. He assumed your loyalty was endless, that your patience had no limits, and that no matter how he acted, you would stay. Day after day, you gave your time, your energy, your attention, without asking for much in return, just to be seen, appreciated, respected. But instead of gratitude, you got indifference. Instead of kindness, you got carelessness. He never really looked closely at how much you were doing. He didn't see how often you chose him, even when it meant putting yourself last. He didn't notice the way you were constantly trying to make things work, the way you carried the emotional weight of the relationship on your shoulders. Because you were always there, he believed you always would be. He mistook your consistency for obligation and your softness for weakness. He believed your silence meant agreement and your forgiveness meant permission to repeat the same behavior. It's easy to take someone for granted when they never stop giving. He never had to. Wonder if you'd be there. You made it too easy. You loved him deeply, and you thought that love would eventually be seen, valued, and returned. But some people don't recognize what they have until it's gone. He didn't see the quiet sacrifices you made, the small moments you swallowed just to keep the peace. He didn't see the way your heart slowly cracked every time you were dismissed, overlooked, or taken advantage of. You showed up for him in ways he never learned to show up for you. And now he'll look around and notice what's missing. He'll realize that the messages stopped coming, the check-ins, the long talks, the affection gone. He'll search for your attention in other people and come up empty, because no one will match the way you cared, the way you made him feel safe, important, and understood. That's when it will hit him. That's when. He'll understand what he lost, but by then your silence will have replaced your presence. Your absence will speak in a language he never bothered to learn when you were right in front of him. You tried to be enough for the both of you, and that's not sustainable. You deserve more than one-sided effort and temporary affection. You deserve to feel like a priority, not just an option. The tragedy is not that you left, it's that he didn't realize you were leaving while you were still there, quietly fading, slowly detaching. He had so many chances to treat you better, to choose you with intention, but he didn't. And now he has to live with that. He has to live with the memory of someone who was all in while he gave only half. Now, you reclaim your energy. You stop trying to be understood by someone who refused to listen. You stop giving pieces of yourself to someone who didn't know what to do with them. Because the moment you finally walked away wasn't out of anger, it was clarity. You saw the truth. You realized that no amount of effort can make someone value you if they're not willing to try. He took your presence for granted, and now he'll be forced to understand the weight of your absence. Not out of revenge, but as a natural consequence of his own actions. And while he sits with the echo of what once was, you move forward wiser, stronger, and no longer waiting to be seen. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. Not to someone who refused to listen the first 100 times you tried. Not to someone who twisted your words, minimized your feelings, or made you question your own reality. You spent so long trying to make them understand, hoping that if you just said it the right way, they would finally get it. But they didn't. Or they chose not to. And that's not your burden to carry anymore. You were always trying to be fair, always trying to be understood. You wanted them to see your side, to see how deeply you were hurting, how hard you were trying to make things work. You thought that maybe if you explained your heart, your pain, your intentions, they would meet you with empathy. But some people don't listen to understand. They listen to defend, to dismiss, to deflect responsibility. They hear only what they want to hear and ignore everything else. You gave them your voice, your truth, and your vulnerability, and they responded with silence, blame, or worse, manipulation. The truth is, if someone truly cared, they wouldn't have needed endless explanations. They would have watched your actions, felt your energy, and seen the cracks forming before you ever had to say a word. You wouldn't have had to beg to be seen, heard, or validated. A person who genuinely values you doesn't wait until you break down to acknowledge your feelings. They don't need repeated explanations to stop hurting you, and when someone constantly demands that you justify your emotions or explain your boundaries, what they're really doing is avoiding accountability. You tried. You gave them chances to understand you. You were patient, honest, and open. But now you've said enough. You've cried enough. You've explained yourself enough. Your peace no longer depends on being understood by someone who made a habit of misunderstanding you. Your healing doesn't require their approval, their agreement, or even their acknowledgement. Some people will never admit what they did, never take responsibility for the way they treated you, and that's okay. You're not walking away because they finally understand, you're walking away because you finally do. You don't need to keep reliving the past just to prove that you were right to leave it behind. You don't need to justify your growth, your silence, or your decision to choose peace over chaos. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. Not everyone is worthy of hearing your truth. There comes a point when continuing to explain becomes a form of self-betrayal, when you're no longer sharing to be understood, but pleading to be accepted. And you deserve more than that. Your decision to walk away, to set boundaries, to be silent, that's yours to own. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You are allowed to protect your peace without feeling guilty about it. The people who truly care won't need long explanations to respect your choices. They will trust your voice, even when it's quiet. Especially when it's quiet. You've already said everything that needed to be said. Now is the time to choose stillness over struggle. Your silence is not avoidance, it's protection. It's the wisdom that comes after countless wasted words. You no longer owe anyone your justifications, your overthinking, your emotional labor. You're allowed to just be, without defending, without explaining, without needing to be understood by someone who never really tried. Let your actions speak. Let your absence say what your words no longer need to. Because you've said enough, and now you're choosing yourself. Your healing begins in silence. Not in loud declarations, not in dramatic exits, not in trying to convince anyone of your pain, but in the quiet moments when you finally stop explaining, stop chasing, and simply allow yourself to breathe. It begins when you stop trying to fix things that broke you, when you stop forcing conversations that only leave you feeling emptier, and when you choose to retreat inward to recover your own voice after it's been drowned out by everyone else's. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. In fact, that's when everything truly starts. It's in the silence where clarity emerges. You begin to see things for what they are, not through the filter of hope or illusion, but with the honesty you once avoided. The noise of trying to be understood, of trying to hold on to someone or something that didn't hold you the same way, fades. And in that space, you start to hear yourself again. You realize that the healing isn't going to come from their apology or their validation. It's going to come from within, from the strength you build every day you choose yourself. When you're constantly surrounded by conflict, confusion, or manipulation, you're always reacting. Always on edge, always waiting for the next emotional blow. Healing can't happen there. It begins when you step away from that chaos and enter into silence, not to escape, but to rebuild. It's in the stillness that you finally feel the weight of everything you've been carrying. At first, it's overwhelming. You feel every disappointment, every betrayal, every time you were left holding the pieces. But slowly, that silence turns into comfort. It becomes a sanctuary instead of something to fear. In silence, you're not pretending anymore. You're not performing strength or masking your pain. You're sitting with it, allowing yourself to feel it all without judgment. You cry, you reflect, you question. And then you begin to understand. You begin to forgive yourself for staying too long, for giving too much, for silencing your own needs just to keep someone else comfortable. And with that understanding comes a kind of peace, one that doesn't come from anyone else's words, but from the acceptance that you deserve better. Healing in silence teaches you patience. It shows you that you don't have to rush your recovery. You don't need to have all the answers or look like you're okay when you're not. It allows you to move at your own pace without the pressure to explain or prove that you're growing. Every quiet moment becomes a step forward. Every breath becomes a reminder that you're still here, still standing, even after everything. You don't need to announce your healing. You don't need to post about it or prove it to those who hurt you. True healing doesn't seek attention. It's personal, sacred, and often invisible. People may think you've gone silent because you're broken, but in truth, your silence is where you're rebuilding. They don't see the work you're doing behind closed doors, the way you're learning to trust yourself again, the way you're discovering joy in small things, the way you're slowly becoming whole. And maybe one day your silence will break not with anger or grief, but with peace. You'll speak again, but this time from a place of strength, not survival. You'll love again, not from desperation, but from abundance. But until then, let the silence hold you. Let it nurture the parts of you that have been screaming for rest. Because this is where your healing begins, not in the noise, not in the chaos, but right here in the quiet where you finally come home to yourself. Your absence is the loudest wake-up call. Louder than the arguments, louder than the tears, louder than any words you ever tried to say when you were hurting and they weren't listening. People become so used to your presence that they forget it's not guaranteed. They grow comfortable with your consistency, with your love, with your efforts, and they stop valuing it. They assume you'll always be there, waiting, forgiving, trying, until one day you're not. And that silence, your absence, is what finally makes them realize what they've lost. When you were there, they overlooked your kindness, dismissed your feelings, and minimized your efforts. They saw your love as something permanent, something unconditional, something they didn't have to earn. You tried to express your pain, your disappointment, your needs, but it fell on deaf ears. You were too available, too forgiving, too understanding, and instead of appreciating that, they took it for granted. They thought you'd never leave because you never did, even when you had every reason to. But everything changes the moment you decide to walk away, not out of spite, not to make a scene, but out of self-respect. Your silence, your absence becomes the message they can't ignore because suddenly the things they overlooked are gone. The good morning texts, the long conversations, the support, the presence, all of it disappears. And with it goes the comfort they took for granted. The air feels heavier without you in it. The days feel longer without your light. And that absence becomes a mirror, forcing them to see just how much you did, how deeply you cared, how often you stayed when you had every right to go. They begin to replay the moments, the times you reached out and they shrugged you off. The times you tried to fix what was breaking and they didn't meet you halfway. The moments you cried and they looked the other way, and slowly regret starts to take root. They realize it wasn't just your presence they lost, it was someone who truly saw them, who genuinely loved them, who gave when they didn't deserve it. Your absence is the kind of silence that lingers. It screams, but it stays. It seeps into the spaces you once filled, reminding them with every quiet moment what it feels like not to have you around. And unlike arguments or ultimatums, absence doesn't fade quickly. It's felt in the emptiness of a room, in the quiet of the phone that doesn't ring, in the pause before they speak your name and realize you're not there to answer. That's when the wake-up call finally comes, not when you cried, not when you begged, but when you simply vanished. And by the time they realize what your presence truly meant, you've already found peace in your absence. You've begun to heal, to grow, to understand your value in ways they never could. You're no longer waiting for an apology, for recognition, or for them to finally get it. Because now you understand that someone who needed your absence to realize your worth never truly deserved your presence in the first place. That's the beauty of walking away quietly. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to hurt them. You just left. And that silence did all the speaking for you. It showed them everything they were blind to. It exposed the truth they refused to face. And most importantly, it reminded you of your power, the kind that doesn't have to shout to be heard. Because sometimes the loudest message you'll ever send is the sound of your footsteps walking away.